readers,
reviewers,
countrymen,
lend us your ears. Welcome back to the Brothers Gwynne channel for another video today, which is a book review of
Rivers of London
and Moon Over Soho, both by Ben Aaronovitch, the first two instalments of the Rivers of London series.
And a little bit about the author. Ben Aaronovitch used to write for Doctor Who and then began the successful Rivers of London series. He was born in London and he has a love for it that has definitely influenced his books.
So before we get any further, I'm just going to read the book blurb of Rivers of London to set a bit of the atmosphere, the tone for those who haven't read it, or as a reminder to those who read it years ago. So, probationary constable Peter Grant dreams of being a detective in London's Metropolitan Police. Too bad his superior plans to assign him to the Case Progression Unit, where the biggest threat he'll face is a paper cut. But Peter's prospects change in the aftermath of a puzzling murder when he gains exclusive information from an eyewitness who happens to be a ghost. Peter's ability to speak with the lingering dead brings him to the attention of Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Nightingale, who investigates crimes involving magic and other manifestations of the uncanny. Now, as a wave of brutal and bizarre murders engulfs the city, Peter is plunged into a world where gods and goddesses mingle with mortals and a long-dead evil is making a comeback on a rising tide of magic.
So as always, we will break up our reviews into several categories. So our first category will be characters. The main character, Peter Grant, I think is a fantastic character. Ben Aaronovitch has definitely done a really good job of fleshing him out, making him feel really realistic and authentic as a police officer working in the London Met. And I love how he starts off a very pragmatic man, and that his personality, that's what he takes into his discovery of the world of fantasy within London. And that world, you might see some strange things in London, but you don't usually see too many vampires walking around. So, and when Peter Grant kind of sees this whole world that's very similar to Neverwhere, then I think the way he approaches it is really realistic. I think him as a character is a little bit sexed up. Lots of the writing was always about that, but you know, I still really enjoyed Peter Grant's perspective. What about you, Will?
Yeah, I agree. I think Peter Grant was really well fleshed out, especially for a first book in a series. So he's a given-up scientist who's now an aspiring constable, as it said in the blurb. He's a really good character. He's very fallible, which I really like because he has his redeeming qualities, but also his vices as well. And I think that he was a really strong aspect of Rivers of London.
Yeah.
I think talking a bit about probably the surrounding cast, I thought they were really good, such as his friend Leslie. Really well done. I think
like their banter, their to and fro. Was
it's
really
very
good.
realistic, isn't it? Yeah, so it's very humorous. And we'll talk a bit more about Aaronovitch's humour later on. I think my only critique really of the characters would be Nightingale, and it's not really a critique. I think a bit in Rivers of London, he's such an interesting character that I really wanted to find out more about him, but he was kind of used mostly, I don't know if you agree, just as exposition in Rivers of London. This is rectified completely in Moon Over Soho, but for Rivers of London I was there yearning for a bit more of Nightingale.
Yeah, I think Moon Over Soho book 2 is all the stronger because of probably the exposition that was actually in book 1. Nightingale set a really good kind of foundation, and then book 2 just kind of jumped from that springboard and could kind of, you know, catapult itself at a much higher level, driving the plot in different ways. So, you know, yeah, definitely, I love the characters. Book 1 characters are really strong. Book 2 characters, I think I prefer the characters in book 2, the secondary cast. They kind of feel like standalones, don't you think?
Yeah, I think a bit like
each one wraps up in itself. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's a bit what I haven't read Last Kingdom yet. I've just started actually, but it's a bit what people say about Bernard Cornwell.
Yeah.
They are all linked, but they seem like standalones at the same time.
It's a good cut-off point, you know.
Yeah. So there's no cliffhangers or anything.
Yeah.
The main story wraps up with some continuing throughout.
Yeah, and I think the secondary characters in Moon Over Soho were just, I found, a lot funnier, and the whole setting. So let's go on into plot then. So
okay.
We'll talk mostly about book 1. I'll talk a little bit about book 2, the plot. But we don't give too much away for those of you that might be wanting to start this, because I can definitely recommend the Audible version of this. which is absolutely brilliant. So the plot now is kind of like it says on the front cover, doesn't it? Harry Potter if you joined the fuzz. So Harry Potter in London. Fantastic idea already straight away. I was hooked.
We're hooked,
that idea. And I love how the different plots interweave and take Peter through the different areas of London. Like we said earlier, Ben Aaronovitch is obviously from London, and he loves, he says it himself.
Yeah, you feel his passion for London. Yeah. He loves it. He says that there's parts that he doesn't like.
Yeah.
But Peter Grant, I think he does put aspects of himself into his main protagonist.
Yeah.
And he defends London, and he will do anything to keep its reputation.
Yeah, and I think the web of the different plots take Peter through London and to discover the fantasy life really organically. It felt very natural for me, and I really enjoyed the plot. I think I prefer the plot in number 2. Moon Over Soho, because there's lots of jazz in there, and I am a bit of a jazz geek. I love jazz. I play the bass, and I used to play a little bit of piano, and Dad loves jazz as well. It's inspired me and it influenced me massively. So I love all the jazz references in book 2, which I just really enjoyed. I think it just like kind of Easter eggs. It gave me a different layer. We're back at it again.
Yeah, again, I think I really agree with you, Ed. I think we had similar feelings on these books. When I started reading it, our dad, who recommended these books to us, said that there's an amazing presentation of London, and that was really delivered. He focuses on a different section of London each time. So the first book, the rivers of London, and the next book is Soho.
I love Covent Garden in the first one. We love visiting Covent Garden. It really reminds us of kind of Dad's book, Forbidden Planet, and he mentions Forbidden Planet.
Yeah.
So, love it.
But even if you haven't been to London, the specific area he's talking about, it's a really visceral description that it just brings the setting to life. And out of everything I've read, it's probably one of the most well-depicted settings I've come across.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that's
breathing with life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that passion that I think most writers, they're passionate about. Ben Aaronovitch has that love for London just to the next level. Alongside this depiction of London, Aaronovitch adds an underbelly that is the setting of a fantastical world. So as Ed said earlier, it has relationships to Neverwhere, which is a brilliant book by Neil Gaiman. There's normal London and there's the underground of London. But also it's a bit like Harry Potter as well, the Wizarding World. The Muggles don't know about the Wizarding World. And it's
very
like
mysterious, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like that.
Cards close to your chest.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Muggles are just oblivious and ignorant again. But the magical creatures, they're very clever. They have their very interesting histories. Some are very old souls. We won't say any spoilers who. And some just have very interesting personalities,
I would agree.
which I think anyone who's read Rivers of London, Moon Over Soho will remember. This coexistence of the magical world and the ordinary world, it's something that we've seen in many books before, like Neverwhere and Harry Potter, but it's something that it really never gets old, is it?
No.
And Ben Aaronovitch, even though he takes this template, he adds a very fresh and new perspective that makes Rivers of London really unique.
So that leads us on over to the prose. So Will, what did you think about Ben Aaronovitch's prose?
I really liked the prose, and I think that it's one of the strongest aspects of these two books. Ben Aaronovitch, again, he has that flavour, his own unique approach to it. And something I really want to focus on, actually, is that we see a slight shift in the prose and style of the writing when regarding the situation of the protagonist, Peter Grant. When he's working, it's a lot more clinical, a lot more tentative.
To the point,
And then when he's out of work, he makes more, he jumps to more conclusions. And I thought just a little detail like that makes it so much more realistic and authentic. Because if we think about our lives, when I'm studying, I have a different mindset.
When you're on a shift at work, it's very different to kind of when you're just strolling around the streets or at a bar in the evening, or that kind of thing.
Exactly, and I think that 95% of books, it doesn't make them worse, but the protagonist has the same mindset and attitude through all times. But what Ben Aaronovitch did that most authors don't, he added this. And that slight shift really made all the difference, and it just made me so happy to read. Yeah, no, definitely. I think Peter Grant's voice, obviously told from his point of view, was really effective. It was very individual. He's a very witty narrator, and I think it was really engaging. I constantly felt engaged, like I was actually listening to someone's genuine thoughts, throughout. It just feels very realistic, and that's I think the key word that we'll take from this review is that it feels very realistic. Whether, like William said, when he's on shift, his thinking is different to
when he's just kind of, you know, free-flowing, walking around in his spare time, or looking at cases on his free time, learning about things. You know, I think it's brilliant. You know, Ben Aaronovitch mixes it up, and I think the prose is really good. And it's like Will said earlier, it's a fresh take on, you know, in a world that's been done before.
Yeah,
made it feel unique, which I think is hard.
It's really hard. Yeah. Also, I think we can't talk about Ben Aaronovich's prose without talking about his humour. Not sure about you, but we listened to the audiobook and it was so funny. I was laughing just out loud. I think that it's very dry humour, and it's got similar aspects again to Neverwhere in that humour, but it's a lot more grittier and a lot older, and in that
very British.
Very British humour. There's
I think there's a Blackadder.
There is a Blackadder reference. If you've read my review on Goodreads, I put that as one of my quotes. And it's very funny in that sense, and the situations that Peter Grant puts himself in. He's a very humorous figure and very humorous writer as Ben Aaronovitch.
And that leads us on over to actions. How is action used in these two books? Now, I think the action was really effective and quite individual for the world. I'm not too used to reading kind of modern takes on fantasy or anything for that matter. Really, I usually read about kind of, you know, historical stuff with slashing swords, and there's none of that in Rivers of London or Moon Over Soho. It's more kind of, you know, modern, real stuff that happens nowadays. You know, kind of. With police batons, you know, but there's also the magic layer as well. And I think the action, when it's used, was really effective. That Ben Aaronovitch built to a nice crescendo towards the end of both novels, really. And the payoff was really nice. I think the action used definitely kind of, you know, like police chases and break-ins. Feels like you could be watching it on a drama on Netflix, kind of like Line of Duty, but imagine if it's with magic as well,
and some vampires and some other creatures
in the Thames and that kind of stuff. So I think the action was used really well. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I thought very similar. I think you have a really good mix of action, which again I think is lacking from a lot of books where an author finds the best part of action that they're good at writing. And they stick to that, but Aaronovitch presents small scale, larger scale, and different scenarios. We won't say any spoilers, but there's a very interesting scene in a theatre which I loved, and there's a lot of tension in that scene. And I think in the Moon Over Soho that really grows again. And Peter Grant fights some weird creatures.
And the thoughts going through his head at the time.
Oh, it's so funny. I think, again, with the action, it is quite serious, but it has that dry humour that does bring it up again. And I think that the action, I think, not the strongest of all his qualities, because there is that humour, so I think the tension doesn't quite hit his peak.
But I think that I like the mixture of kind of his action as well as, like we said earlier, his realistic thoughts.
Yeah, definitely.
It's quite tongue-in-cheek, a lot of it, and I really enjoy that personally.
Yeah, and I think, again, with the action, Aaronovitch has really given a unique take on it, and I think that's the main takeaway that I got from these two books, is that they are really unique, and there's really nothing, even though they can be related to Neverwhere and Harry Potter, it's so different from them, so they shouldn't be really put in the same category and confined to that.
Yeah. And that takes us over to world building. Now, obviously, we've mentioned a lot about London, how realistic we think his portrayal of London is, and all the fantasy creatures within it. So I'll just kind of reiterate the point that it is a very weird and wonderful world that's unique, similar to Neverwhere, but it's got, especially in book 2, a lovely jazz foundation mixed in with the characters. I think the world building and the characters blend really well. They all feel like they've got their own lives and not there just for plot's sake, kind of thing. I think, and definitely with Nightingale, he shows how there's a rich history that feels very Neil Gaiman-esque, where, you know, and Terry Pratchett's similar to like Good Omens, where there's kind of a rich history and a layer underneath, you know, like the modern reader's understanding. Kind of, he gives us these references that are just, you know, some of them are hilarious, some of them really feel kind of on the nose, you know. So world building, great.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The world building, again, Aaronovitch loves London, and we've talked a lot about that. But I also want to say that you get to see London from the Dark Ages to its modern day, and how it grows and how more spirits emerge because of changes to London. I think it's very similar to Russian mythology that's shown a lot in the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, in that the spirits stay in their local territory They don't travel around everywhere. Well, some do in this world. A lot of them are confined to the rivers of London. There's a figure called Mama Thames and Papa Thames. So I think that explains they stay in their area. And I think the world building, as you said, it really does interlink nicely between the magical and ordinary world.
Yeah.
And how these magical figures do integrate into society. And I think Aaronovitch, again, just puts a unique take on it. I've said it before, but I think it's important to say it a lot because that is really what I'm pushing. If you want something that's really different to read, but still within the fantasy genre, this is the book to go for, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching our review of Rivers of London and Moon Over Soho by Ben Aaronovitch. We hope that you've enjoyed listening to this. Please let us know in the comments below what you thought of these books, if you think that you'll pick them up, or if you've read the whole series. We'd love to see what people think of the next book, which is... what's it called again?
Whispers Underground.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for watching this video. We hope that you enjoyed. Let us know if you like this format, if you'd like us to mix it up a bit. And if you did enjoy, please subscribe, and then you'll know some further reviews when they come out. So for now, I think that's goodbye from the Brothers Gwynne.
Stay safe.
Truth and courage.
Truth and courage.